Hello, and welcome to the premiere episode of the Baby Boomer Roundtable. We're all excited to join you here today, and our topic is exploring the path forward for the baby boomer generation. As you can probably see, I'm here with a distinguished group of baby boomer experts whom I will introduce to you shortly. Our plan today is to explore a number of topics of vital concern to all boomers, including success, investing, grandchildren, using sports to stay active, caregiving, and relationships. But before I get too far into this discussion, I want to recognize someone who's been a key part of our group, but who isn't visible on your screens. He's Rick Bava of today's Senior Magazine and the author of In Search of the Baby Boomer Generation, a book for baby boomers by a baby boomer. Rick and I first got to know each other shortly after I reviewed his book. We've stayed in touch since that time and periodically looked at ways that we could work together. Until this time, none of them ever worked out, but a phone call last February is what brings the rest of us here today. So now, audience, we've set aside 90 minutes for this Zoom discussion, so I urge you to get comfortable, maybe make sure you have a beverage close at hand, and perhaps be prepared to take a few notes. But if notes aren't your thing, don't worry. We're recording this event, and at the end, we'll tell you how you can access the recording. At this point, it is my pleasure to tell you about the folks you see on your screen, starting with myself. My name is Ann Holmes. I'm your moderator and host, and you may know me as the Boomer-in-Chief of the National Association of Baby Boomer Women, a job I've been enjoying for almost 20 years now. NABBW is an organization dedicated to educating and empowering women at midlife and beyond. But as I said to Rick when we first started talking about this event, we don't just have to deal with women just because I run the NABBW. You know, baby boomers are men too, and so we have equal representation here, and I think that's good. I've been fascinated by the aging process and how we baby boomers are handling it ever since I took my first course in gerontology back in the mid-70s. Though back then, I really couldn't have envisioned myself aged beyond young adulthood. By training and profession, I'm a marketer, but for the past 20 years, I've had an idea in the back of my mind to hold an event which I've personally dubbed a salon. That is, getting together with a handful of people who share similar interests and are willing to sit down and have a deep discussion on a topic of vital interest over drinks and good food. So as you might imagine, even though this is my first salon, so to speak, and it's virtual, there's no good food present for any of us. We probably are drinking water or coffee or something, but I'm really looking forward to this roundtable event. And as far as my motto, what motivates me, well, I'm not ever planning to retire, since I think staying mentally and physically active is absolutely imperative to living a successful and productive life. I have been concerned by the intergenerational stresses that I've been seeing in the world in the past few years, especially as were manifested last year by that horrid slogan, "Okay, Boomer." So instead of arguing against that term, I think it is time that we adopt the role of sages or respected elders. And part of that role for me means to take all that we've learned in our roles and pay it forward. So that's a little bit about me. Joining me on your screen are my posse, the 6 experts that I'll be sharing conversation with today. Each is a nationally acclaimed baby boomer advocate. I'll introduce them in alphabetical order. So panel, when I mention your name, please give a little wave so our audience can put a name with their face. And then after I introduce you, I'd like each of you to tell the audience a little bit about yourself. Don't be shy about mentioning any relative or relevant websites that you run, your URLs for those websites, and how the audience can best connect with you, okay? First up is Renee Balcom. Renee is someone I wish I'd met 3 years ago when I was desperately searching for someone to help me find help for my mother. She is a passionate advocate for educating baby boomers around the business of care, both for their parents and other loved ones. Her motto is, "See care differently." Renee, could you please share a little bit more about yourself, please?
Sure. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me here today, Ann. Yes, I am a professional healthcare advocate, and I made my way through to that career. I actually was in technology and was the CEO of a tech company for over 20 years. And then just through a series of life events, I found myself in the senior care industry. And while I was in that industry, I saw so many gaps and areas that really needed to be bridged, and families that just weren't getting the information that I felt that they should have, as any business would normally provide. And I saw people making really emotional and critical decisions just in the middle of crisis and not really thinking things through. So in that process, I decided to become a healthcare advocate. And frankly, I didn't even know that's what you called it at the time. I just started helping one neighbor at a time, and pretty soon found myself with 39 employees serving 5 counties.
Wow.
Right. So and that was indicative of the market, right? I ended up writing the scope of practice for the healthcare advocate for the state of Oregon, and then came back to California. I'm in Sacramento, California. Came back to California and started teaching at Sac State, and teaching about healthcare advocacy in a adult educational program there called Enlightened Aging that I created. So, and then, back to my technical roots, right? I kept thinking, like, where is technology for all of us, right? Where's technology in the middle of this? And so I am currently developing an app that will help teach people how to write care plans and how to access vetted providers in your marketplace. So, so I've been busy. I love healthcare advocacy. I still have a book of my own book of clients that I serve every day, but and that keeps me fresh and in the front lines of what's going on in care. And it's just a very exciting time for all of us.
Now, how would people recognize that they need a healthcare advocate?
Well, the human brain is an interesting tool, if you will. When we are introduced to trauma or maybe life-altering information, honestly, our brain really kind of doesn't process all the information that's coming at us. So we get really, really myopic, and we're not normally hearing all the information. And so that's why we tend to react to crisis, ineffectively, if you will, or incorrectly. I say, if you're facing or a loved one is facing a healthcare challenge, you probably need a professional healthcare advocate. And not to be confused. So almost every hospital setting today is providing advocacy. And so it's becoming very, very popular. However, those advocates work for the hospital. So you want someone that's there on your behalf. And there is a National Health Advocates Association now. It's becoming it's a blossoming career, and more people, especially in the baby boomer group, is stepping into advocacy, because frankly, most of us are advocating for our spouse or our parents or our kids, right? So, so it's really become an area that is growing pretty rapidly in the United States. So I recommend advocacy to anyone that's dealing with their own healthcare challenge or trying to navigate a healthcare challenge for their loved one.
Yes.
Okay. Now, would you say that, I think I understand from what you said that as a baby boomer, I can't be an advocate for myself. I can be an advocate for somebody else, but not for myself. Is that correct?
No, I think, frankly, I think we all have to learn how to be advocates for ourselves in the healthcare system, because there's always going to be that moment where they take us in a room alone. And again, coming through a pandemic, we've all had that experience where ourselves or someone we loved or a neighbor or someone we heard about ended up going through maybe a healthcare challenge and was alone, right? So we have to learn that. I don't believe that's the last time we're going to have that experience. So we really, really have to learn that. But when we can have another set of ears and eyes and in the room with us, I think that's equally as important. So, but yeah, there's this thing called white coat syndrome, and most of us have it. And it's that thing where, I take care of my elderly mother, and she will, we'll spend weeks hearing about something that's bothering her. Then we go to the doctor, and the doctor walks in and says, what are you here for today? And my mom will say, well, I'm good. How are you, doctor? And it's like, what the heck are you talking about?
Right.
I've been listening to you for weeks now, right? So, but we all tend to do that because most of us were brought up with the idea that, we don't really express our bad news to each other. our medical or healthcare concerns to each other. So we all have a little bit of that, and we have to learn to be prepared as we enter a healthcare challenge or an environment with a doctor in asking questions, and also questioning that doctor, always respectfully, but asking for the right referrals, or saying, I don't understand, or maybe I don't even agree. And I've been doing this for 20 years now, so I've met a lot of doctors I did not agree with. I also have a specialty in mental health and behavioral health. So in the psych sciences, there's a lot of things I don't agree with. So I tend to challenge those doctors on a regular basis.
How do doctors respond when you challenge them?
Usually they start by asking me if I'm a medical professional. And I tell them no, because I don't want to get confused in my practice. What I am is I'm a logical, educated, thinking person, by the way, from Missouri. And I just have that Midwestern sensibility that if it doesn't make sense, it's not reasonable. Like where's the disconnect, right? And so I've always been someone that, will ask questions. And usually when the doctors recognize that I'm there on behalf of my client to help bridge those gaps and to bring information to both sides of the party. So I'll give you an example. I had my very first client, his name was Andy. Andy came to me and he said, he had heard me speak, and he called me up and he said, hey, I'm having problems. I get these really bad headaches and I don't know what to do. So I went and I sat down with him and I looked at his meds. Well, the guy was taking like 5 different blood pressure meds. And it's like, Andy, how did this even happen? And so he said, and Andy was 87 at the time, lived independently, great guy. And he said, well, I just go, if there's a line at the pharmacy, I go to another pharmacy. And I'm like, well, do you realize that this medication is in lieu of this one? It's not to be taken with. And no one had ever explained that to him. And the pharmacists weren't looking at because he was going to different pharmacies, they weren't looking at all the different meds he was taking, right? They were just filling his meds. So he was going home and adding to his already complex, meds list. And so I said, let's go to the doctor, let's get your baseline, figure out what you really need and make certain you're on the right meds. Well, we make the appointment, we go to the doctor, and his doctor was stunned because he had no idea. Every time he wrote him a prescription, he was just adding to what he already had, right? And there's this group of elder seniors that tend to hoard their medicine. So even if it's old, it's like, well, somewhere around here, I have that, right? And so they just kind of tend to hang on to those meds. And most medical professionals don't dial into how we're behaving at home. So my job is to help bridge that. I come in, I make certain that I understand what the doctor's needs are and how he wants my client to be compliant. And then I go home with my client and make certain and assist them towards compliancy and success in their healthcare exchange. So that's really what a good healthcare advocate should be available to do.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nina Bard is next. Nina is co-owner of BRT Sports, a family-owned company dedicated to health, fitness, and lifestyle. Nina, will you tell us a little bit about you and your personal motto?
We have 2 mottos. One is relief in motion, and the other is don't let pain keep you out of the game. And it's really interesting because the way we started, it was simply a business to make compression bracing, period. Private labeled for some big global companies. And that was the extent of it. The more involved I became in it, and the more meetings I had with companies, I began to realize that they weren't bringing the good stuff to the United States. I was told this is a great product, but it'll never see the light of day here. I can buy garbage in China, those are his words, and make a whole lot more money. Nobody knows the difference. I came home from that meeting. I was in a boardroom at a big company. And I finally understood that we weren't getting the good stuff. You can walk into a drugstore, you can spend $10, $20, whatever. It's not going to do much. I even found out that some physical therapists and doctors don't want to carry the expensive stuff. They want, So the unexpected happened. I started talking to people. I said to my husband, we have to sell direct here. This can't just be for global companies. We have to make our product available to Americans because, and I'm not trying to make a sale here, our stuff is great. It works. It's compression bracing. It's made 100% here. It changes people's lives. It's what Europe uses for their bracing. It's what South America uses. Only we don't. So our products are all made here. We opened up a website. We did Facebook. I don't know. I didn't know marketing, social media. This was not my forte, but I think frustration and anger got me going to get this out to the public. Then a friend called me one day, a couple of years ago, and said, "Hey, Nina, I hurt my ankle. I need to come over and get a brace from you." A close friend. And I said, "What'd you do?" She goes, "Well, I was on vacation in Florida and I heard her playing pickleball." And I said the unimaginable. "What's pickleball?"
Yeah.
And she told me, it still didn't ring a bell. Okay, I gave her the brace. Well, a week later, another friend called. She was vacationing in Colorado. She played pickleball. She hurt her ankle. That was it. I started researching. I started looking into the sport. It was the baby boomer sport. Across the board, the fastest growing sport in America. What's difficult for baby boomers? The court is shorter and narrower than a tennis court. A lot of lateral movements because of that, a lot of twisted ankles. So I said, this is where we have to zone in on to begin with, because it's fitting into what I was thinking about. How do you keep people active? We've been at the New York Marathon. We had a booth. People were lined up, mostly Europeans, because our pricing was better than Europe, and they knew what our products were. And we had to educate. That was the hardest thing. I mean, they'd call me up, why are you asking $70 for an Achilles ankle brace? I can buy it for $12. And I have to educate them. And so we started to grow grassroots, changing people's lives and relationship with clients, customers. So I'm not like the rest of the panel here in the sense that I was just working in the business to sell a product. But over the years, it changed into a mission. And I could tell you so many stories of people. I have fishermen calling me for the elbow brace. I couldn't believe this one because of casting. And they go fishing with our elbow brace and wrist brace. It changed their lives. They could continue it. I have people who were playing pickleball, were going to give it up, or tennis because of tennis elbow. They buy the right product, they're measured correctly. They go back to playing, go back to walking, go back, and it's limitless. It's not just sports, it's arthritis. Compression is what you need for arthritis. So if somebody has in their ankle, in their knee, in their wrist, in their elbow, we can help them. We can really change their lives. It's not me making a sale, it's us providing a means for them to continue. And so our business really began to change to the boomers. Now, we have a number of pros that we got involved with in pickleball, but they're all young because the young people now are in it to win it. It's spread. But I have one pro. I love him. He's a senior. And, I always have him in the magazine ads because he'll tell you, I'm playing. I need this brace, I need this knee brace. So that's who we are. And we get very involved, not just with sports, but medical arthritis. It's amazing. Some doctors are really not having the high-end stuff. I will tell you, a lot of people want it covered totally by Medicare or insurance, which is definitely this age group. Well, Medicare changed their coding that unless there's a hinge in a product, there's no reimbursement. So they're not going to get it for free. So it's education, it's people realizing, I'm going to have this for a year. I can wash it. It's going to change my life. So I don't want to sound like a salesman here. It's not the point of this. The point is that you can stay active, whether it's golf, tennis, bowling, ping pong, working, carrying things, lifting, all that stuff. Compression bracing can be preventative and it can be recovery. And it's about getting the right thing for what you need. And we got involved in it. And through social media, we really expanded the people we can reach. And one day I got a call from Baby Boomer magazine saying, I think you belong with us. And that's how I got involved here.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
All right. So are you saying that your products are particularly useful to boomers because of the arthritis and the fact that we all want to stay active?
Yeah. In other words, you can have an arthritic knee, and if it's not where you need surgery. So when you put compression, and particularly, let's say the knee, we have a handmade silicone insert that basically your knee's fitting into it. And then you've got the compression sleeve, and it's made in a way that it's not annoying, it doesn't bunch and all that stuff, and it never slips. People run marathons in it. But the point is, the silicone is massaging the knee. So it's creating blood flow. Blood flow helps with arthritis. It reduces inflammation. So that's why it's really good for that stuff. I'm sure you've heard of the Achilles, having problems with Achilles, right?
Mm-hmm.
People call me amazed. People who were out of the game, couldn't do anything. They put the brace on and they're fine. So it's about getting it out there, helping them. That's why I don't let pain keep you out of the game. It doesn't have to. There was a veterinarian. This is a good story. He called me for something. He didn't know I was doing braces, that this was a thing. And from here, they were talking. And then he said, oh, I see on your email that something with braces. Turns out he was a veterinarian. He was a runner. And he stopped. He stopped because he had Achilles problems. He had 2 surgeries. He had scar tissue. And he gave it up. I said, give me your measurement. He said, no, I don't want one. I said, I'm not charging you. Just give me your measurement. I sent it to him. A year later, he was in the Scottish Marathon. He called me up. He said, I don't believe this. I'm on the elliptical. I'm not getting the shots, the little electric. I said, give it more time. So that's my mission. I mean, people can stay active. They can feel better. They can do what they want to do if they have the right products there for them. And my thing was, Americans deserve to have them, and they weren't here.
I certainly thank you for that. So thank you so much, Nina. Our third expert is Barbara Gordon, and Barbara calls herself the Love Muse. Her motto is, I connect with others via loving presence, thoughtful kindness, and conscious compassion. Barbara, would you please tell us a little bit more about you and how you came to be a muse?
Yes, I'm so honored to be here. So I want to thank everybody at first. That's really important. How I came to be a muse was I was living in Japan and started to do matchmaking there. And it was really interesting because I worked for corporate. I've had a lot of different careers, and I thought, I want to be an entrepreneur. That's the way that I work the best, to work for myself. So I started developing that when I was in Japan, and I thought, I don't ever want to work for anyone again. So started to help people in relationships, and everything is relationship, with friends, with people, especially during the pandemic when there was a lot of isolation with people because they weren't connecting. So people were getting down and depressed, and we all need connections. So I think that what I started to do is starting to help people to be with others and to learn, did a lot of workshops about, relationships in general. And then I started moving into dating, and a lot of widow and widowers and divorcees, they didn't know how to get back into the game anymore because they haven't had an opportunity and they were fearful and scared. So what I do is I help prepare them and I work with them on an individual basis to help them get out in the world again. It's so exciting. I'm going to be going in June to a wedding for a client that just met the love of her life. And it's never too late, because an 80-year-old woman I was working with it just found the love of her life. So a lot of people say, I'm too old, I'm too this, I'm too that. But really, it's about being willing and open to want that and to move forward with it. So I find it to be so exciting, and I make it fun. And it's sometimes you find the most wonderful relationship of your life later on in life.
Mhm.
A lot of people say, oh no, I'm done. But it's kind of sad, because you're only beginning in a way, because it's another experience. So I'm a firm believer of new experiences, living life to the fullest. And I do play pickleball.
Okay.
and I want to talk to you. So I really love that you're helping people in later life, because I really believe in being active and healthy, and being on the move is really important. So I love what I do, and what people could do is get in touch with me. It's www.thelovemuse.com, and I offer a 30-minute complimentary consultation. Would love to hear from anyone who would like to speak to me. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome, Barbara. All right. Now, starting with the men, let me introduce Gramps Jeffrey, an award-winning author, most recently the author of the children's book, I Don't Want to Turn 3. Gramps' motto is, it is necessary for us to teach children how to think, not what to think. Gramps, would you share a little bit more about yourself, please?
Thank you very much. Here's a copy of my book, if you can't see it. I Don't Want to Turn 3. That's my latest adventure. Living this past year because of the pandemic caused by COVID-19 and isolation, except for being with my family, gave me special time to kind of watch and interact with grandkids. And I got to tell you what a trip that was. But, as I'm listening to all these other panelists, which are quite interesting, there are so many things we can talk about today. My book was based on what happened. I mean, I wouldn't have written my book unless COVID came around, because it gave me a chance to really be with my family. But, if you think about COVID, 65-year-olds and older are 16% of the population, but 75% of the COVID deaths came from people 65 and older. I heard a couple of days ago that the average lifespan now of adults here in the US since COVID started has gone down 2 years. We're not going to be living as much. So we as adults and baby boomers have got to take advantage of today. We can't worry about tomorrow, because we may not be here tomorrow. So that's something we should be all talking about, is what are we going to do today to change this world, to influence? My thing is with the little kids and helping them come along, but it's a bigger picture. And the other thing that I picked up by listening to all these great panelists so far is, I like all your panelists, was an entrepreneur before I became a children's book author. I started a couple businesses, of which one I took public. But I heard yesterday that in my state, which is Arizona, that 50% of the small and medium-sized businesses are owned by baby boomers. Now, it could be different, a little different in some other states, but I don't think there's much off of that. So when you think about that, and you think about entrepreneurs, that if a family owns a business, there's a 30% chance that you'll pass it on to the next generation. I mean, by the time it gets to like 3 or 4 generations, only 10%, but there's a 30% chance you'll pass it on. But there are so many entrepreneurs that are owning these businesses. Think about half the businesses in my state are owned by baby boomers. What's going to happen? All of you are talking about, you're an entrepreneur, you own your own business. What's going to happen? You combine the COVID and us dying faster than ever. You combine that we own half of what is the small and medium-sized businesses in this country. Our generation is pivotal here. We can either make an impact or we can just walk away. And I think that we should be talking about how are we going to be making an impact.
Mhm. Yes.
I agree.
Yes,
All right.
all of us.
Now, would you say that it's the responsibility of baby boomers to give back more than they have?
Oh, absolutely.
Mhm.
We look at ourselves as the greatest generation. We've gone through Vietnam War, protests. We've built this country up until it's the greatest. We think we're really good. So now's the time to give back. I mean, we have to. But more importantly, we have to train this youngest, newest generation, all these kids, 1 to 18, how they can give back. That's going to be our legacy. We go back to the thought that it's necessary to teach children how to think, not what to think. We need to teach them how to think. So, we have to teach them to lean into this chaos of life and figure out how to make it better. And that's what we have to do. And that is, if we have one mission as we're getting into our elderly years, is we have got to get that message to the youngest generation. So America will be a greater country today, tomorrow, than it is today.
Excellent. I thank you for that.
Great.
Doug Sohn is next. He's a personal development coach and founder of Success After 60. Doug, I know you've reinvented yourself and that your motto is, I'm never done growing. Could you tell us a bit more about how you got to that point of personal reinvention?
Thanks, Ann, and thanks for putting on this great event and for allowing me to participate. To answer your question, Success After 60 is actually my second career. I've been a trial lawyer specializing in consumer law for consumers for the past over 40 years. I started this new business about 2 years ago when I turned 67. And it's sometimes you make changes in your life because you're inspired. Sometimes it's because you hit sort of a moment of self-revelation. And that's what happened to me. I ended up in a hospital bed for 3 days. We had planned to celebrate our 40th wedding anniversary, Sherry, my wife and I, and we had people invited over. We were going to have a wedding cake and renew our vows and all that. And a few days before that happened, I ended up suffering a TIA mini stroke. Actually had 4 of them in the space of 24 hours. little scary. Fortunately, it didn't leave me with any lasting injuries, but I did end up having to spend 3 days in the hospital. We celebrated our 40th anniversary in my hospital room with just our kids around us. We have 5 of them, so it was still a pretty big crowd. But it did sort of leave me with some time to ponder where I was in my life. And there's a little bit of background. I've been studying personal development science for almost 40 years, starting with Earl Nightingale and going all the way through to like Tony Robbins. I've walked on fire with Tony Robbins a couple of times. I see some of the people around the room are familiar with that. And I'd apply that to my life and reached certain levels of success. But I realized that sitting in that hospital bed at 67, that I'd sort of hit a plateau. That looking back, I realized I hadn't made any major improvements for a while. And I also, more importantly, hadn't reached a lot of the dreams that I had. And I was kind of scratching my head and wondering how that had happened. And I realized that I kind of fallen into the stereotype that society has for people our age. You hit 65 or so, and you're really not going to reach any new dreams. Most people believe, whatever you've done is what you've done. Many people retire at that age or not, or at least they're sort of plateauing. And I bought into that, and I knew better, because I'd been studying all this. And I realized, well, no, I don't accept that. That's not what I'm going to do. And I recommitted to going back and studying personal development science and also learning the new knowledge about it. Some amazing things going on in brain science, nutrition, physical fitness, all those sorts of things. And to get myself off that plateau and go back to, following my dreams. And as I gave more thought to that, I looked around and realized, there was really nobody teaching these things to people our age. Even the leading lights in personal development have a tendency to be speaking more to the younger people, and understandably, and it's absolutely critical that the people in the younger years learn this and get the best start in their life. But I think we're left out to a certain extent, our age group. And so I wanted to be that person. And so I started Success After 60. Our motto, I'm never done growing, is kind of a simple term, but it sort of hides a lot of meaning. And what I mean by that is it is really important for all of us at our age to understand that we have not reached the end of our growth, that we are not here just to kind of look back on our life, and whatever we've done at this point is what we've done, and the things we haven't done, well, you don't ever want to say to yourself, well, I never did this. I never traveled the world, which is one of my dreams. I never started this business. I never did that, because you still have plenty of opportunity. And we're learning through new brain science, brain plasticity, neuroplasticity, those sorts of things, that throughout our life, we can build new neural connections in our brains, dissolve old ones. We can continue to grow mentally in ways that we really did not understand even a few years ago, which is a really exciting thing to understand. And you can continue to keep growing. And I also started looking at things like what they call the longevity revolution, and it's been mentioned a couple of times here. We're living longer than people used to, and society hasn't really adjusted to that. The stereotype is you get to our age and you really, it's time to kind of enjoy your golden years because you don't have that much time left. But people in this room could easily live another 30 or 40 years. I mean, you think about that. If you think you really have only been in your 60s an adult for about 40 years, by the time you get to 20 is about the time you become an adult and you started your career and that sort of thing. So you've had only 40 years up to this point to do all the things that you've done. You probably have another 40 years, 30 or 40 years ahead of you. So, I mean, really, you could easily, I know, isn't that great, Renee? You could easily start a whole new career like I did, and have plenty of time for it to be successful. You could start, a third career. And I don't think people have adjusted to that. And so the first thing that I try to convey to my audience is this whole concept of the fact that you're never done growing, and give some thought to who it is that you want to be and what it is that you want to accomplish, and understand that you can do that. And so that's really my mission, is to help people in our age group overcome those stereotypes and understand the vast potential that we have, particularly given the decades of experience and wisdom that we have that we can apply to it. If you knew back when you were 20 what you know now, I mean, think about the trajectory of the success that you could have. And that's basically where you are right now.
All right. What strategies and information do you share with your audience to help them reach success, Doug?
Well, there are a few things. One of the first things that I try to convey to people is this concept of getting control over your own thoughts and your own beliefs. And that concept we used to call state of mind, now they tend to call it mindset. And so one of the things that I teach is what I call winning your morning. And it is the concept that you should start every morning on your own terms. That you don't pick up the phone for at least the first half hour. You don't listen to the news. You don't read the newspaper. People still read newspapers. And you set out to set your own sort of set point for your mind. And I've got a whole morning routine that I do. And I've got actually what's called the Win Your Morning Guide that I make available to people. And actually I'd be happy to provide that as a gift to your audience if that's okay with you.
That'd be wonderful.
Great. So what I'd like to do is I can put into the chat the link to that. And I just did that.
All right.
And so you can go and you can use that morning guide to start your day off, your morning off on your own terms. And the way I look at it is, if you can win your morning, you can win your day. If you win your day consistently, then you can win your life. And it's really kind of like the first thing that I try to convey to people, is how to get that early kind of control over what you think, because most of what we get from the outside, particularly these days, particularly the news media and all that, is very positive, is very negative. There's not much positivity to it. And we all understand that, but not everybody really thinks through what the consequences of that are. So if you start out your morning with all these negative thoughts having been pumped into your brain, that's going to affect your frame of mind. It's going to affect your ability to accomplish what it is that you set out to accomplish. So I turn that around and encourage you to choose your own frame of mind for yourself so that you can accomplish what you want to accomplish. And I think that's kind of the first skill, if you will, that I try to convey to people. This whole idea. First thing is, you're never done growing is this whole underlying concept, and then how to get control of your morning and get control of your day is like the first skill I teach after that.
All right. Well, we'll talk to you more about that later, Doug, but thank you for that now. And finishing out our roundtable is Ron Surz. He's a professional investment manager whose passion is helping his fellow baby boomers at this critical time in their lives when they are relying on their lifetime savings to support a retirement with dignity. And he's certainly aware that most of us are going to live into our 90s and probably haven't been expecting to plan for that. So Ron, your motto is retirement investing has never been harder. So Ron, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your area of expertise?
Sure. So this is a Zoom meeting. I'm going to zoom through 50 years of investment experience in about 2 minutes, then try to hone in on the last 10 years roughly. So I started actually in my first job was as a rocket scientist with Northrop, but I changed jobs fairly quickly and went into the finance industry. And I've consulted to institutional investors trillions of dollars. And then 30 years ago, I became a serial entrepreneur and wrote software, worked with a variety of fairly well-known people. And 20 years ago, we retired. And by retire, I mean, we had, as a serial entrepreneur, we could live anywhere. So we moved to California. And the idea was we could work and work and work. And when I get to be 70, 80, 90 years old, we can move to a nice place. But we decided to do that 20 years ago. And I have basically been scratching itches for most of that. But what I was drawn to 10 years ago was an investment thing that's called a target date fund. And it's interesting, not many people, unless you're in a 401k plan, you probably don't know what that is, but it's a default option for people who in 401k plans can't make their own decisions. And what a target date fund does is it invests fairly aggressively for young people and then becomes more conservative as you get closer to retirement. And I've developed a patented glide path. I am a lot different than most of the other target date funds in the industry, but that whole adventure, by the way, I got involved because I had friends who called me and said, this thing is on the horizon and it's right up your alley, Ron. You need to get on this. So a lot of my work historically for clients was asset allocation, how much in stocks, how much in bonds, investment policy work. And this is right up that alley. So I got involved. And then one of the key things about a target date fund is very much about baby boomers. So retirement researchers have found that there's this concept called a risk zone. And it's the 5 to 10 years before and after when you retire. And if you're one of the unlucky ones, which by the way, nobody in the last 13 years has been unlucky because the market's only been going up. But if you're one of the unlucky ones and you lose money during that transition period, it could change the rest of your life to the worse. And then the idea there is you can try to go back into the workforce to make it back. You can try to do a lot of things, but the thing that's most likely to give is your lifestyle. And I can tell you right now that most target date funds do not protect enough. So that's the real problem. But when we moved to California, we moved to a fairly affluent area, and I've gotten to know some really great people. Most of them are pretty wealthy. And I would say, ask them questions like, how are you invested? And I could not make this up. They sort of know, but they don't. And they would say to me, I've had this advisor forever. He's the godfather to my son. He's this and that. And he walks on water. So this thing about people really not being aware, I think is real. And there's this thing about financial education, financial literacy. Most surveys find that people are not financially literate. And for baby boomers, that's a particularly important thing. I heard the number 73 million. I think it's closer to 75 million anyway. Most of them are going to be in the risk zone for all of this decade, the decade of the 2020s. And the odds of getting through this decade without a serious market correction are slim to none. So we've talked a little bit about retirement happiness. My sister's on this call. So at Christmas of 2019, I started saying to Kathy, I'm trying to help these people. I'm writing a lot, but I don't think the message is getting out. And she said, I do this show. It's called The Dog Connection. And she's got millions of followers. She's got a terrific show. She said, I'll help you. So we started this thing called the Baby Boomer Investing Show. And it's babyboomerinvesting.show if you want to find it. And we now have 35 shows that we've done. For just about every show that we've run, I've written an article. And I just recently wrote a book, Baby Boomer Investing in the Perilous Decade of the 2020s. And it's basically a guided tour of the shows. So every chapter in the book has links to a show or two. 3 of our shows are about retirement happiness. And it's interesting that this panel covers all of them. So the keys to retirement happiness, there'll be no surprise to anybody here, are health, of course. Can't be happy if you're sick. Wealth, that's what I'm talking about. And the third one is purpose. Now, purpose has a lot of aspects to it. And one of our guests was very much, he wrote books about having gratitude in retirement, be happy with what you got, that kind of stuff. That's related to purpose. We had one of our guests wrote the book, Retirement, Heaven or Hell. And it was really an interesting interview. He was forced into retirement and he hated it. But once he was there, he had this resolve to it's going to be what it's going to be. And he patterned his retirement after what he saw his mother doing. So that was watching TV, sitting out in the backyard, drinking Cokes, whatever. It was doing nothing. And for him, that was hell because he had no purpose. So then he talks about how he discovered heaven. And his heaven has been writing books and doing speaking engagements and stuff like that. So I'm going to come back to what I do. I really think, while most people hopefully, should at least question now at this time of their life, are they protected against investment losses? What baby boomers should be doing right now is protecting their assets. And in this environment where we're probably going to see much more inflation, putting it in cash is probably not going to be the best thing you can do for yourself, because that purchasing power of that money is going to be dwindling. So there are things you can do. Some of them are non-traditional. Some of them may shake up your investment advisor, but that might mean you need another investment advisor. So I'm trying to help our fellow baby boomers. That's what I do.
All right, so you wrote the book to help your fellow baby boomers, it sounds like.
Yes.
How would you say baby boomers should be investing right now?
Okay, so we've had a couple of shows on this. Number one is safety. And by the way, the risk zone is only 5 to 10 years before and after retirement. So as you're ending your working life, you should be moving towards this protection. And this is fairly well documented, although I will say this, target date funds are not giving you that protection. Then as you pass through retirement and you're in retirement, you should stay safe for probably another 5 to 10 years. But that right now, with safe money is returning, you're probably going to need to start to re-risk just to extend the life of those assets. So it's sort of a U-shape kind of investment pattern. In terms of what's safe, one of our guests was an award-winning journalist, and he's in Israel. And he suggested that we look to the Talmud because it's the book of wisdom, and it's been around for a long, long time. And the Talmud says a third in land, a third in business, and a third in reserve. And that a third formula is this, it's not far off from what I totally recommend. The third in land is pretty straightforward. It's real estate. And that ought to be a reasonably good, hedge against inflation. Probably not perfect, but reasonably good. The third in business, it could be stocks, but we're thinking right now with where things are going, that third in business could be things like commodities, precious metals, um, um, losing track, gold, for example. Cryptocurrencies actually have a role right now. I don't think cryptos would exist if it weren't for people having inflation fears. So that's a basket of things that you probably wouldn't normally do. The safe asset, the reserve asset in this kind of situation is primarily TIPS, Treasury Inflation Protected Securities. In addition to that stuff, you can do more exotic things that you really want to educate yourself before you do. But there are instruments that basically pay off when the market goes down. And one of those things is it's called a put option. And most people think that that option is dangerous, but it's actually insurance. So you can basically protect the downside by buying a put option. There are variants on that are easier to buy and to use. And I won't start advertising for some of these. In the current environment where I'm pretty sure interest rates are going to keep on, by the way, the Federal Reserve is in a box right now. So it's said it's going to step up and start to fight inflation. But it's been instrumental in the inflation being what it is. We have printed $13 trillion in the last 10 years, $13 trillion. Now, $1 trillion is a lot of money. To put it in perspective, World War II, present value cost 4.7 trillion. So we have printed more money in the last several years than we spent on all of World War II. And the way that's being done is it's not the printing press is running. The Treasury issues bonds, and normally there's enough people to take them up, but not anymore. So the only buyer on those bonds has been the Federal Reserve. So the thing about inflation being transitory, right now it's transitory because it's what's called demand pull inflation. And that's because supply chains have been disrupted. The other variant on that is called cost push. And that's when there's too much money in the economy and this is going to continue to create inflation. So the Fed is going to start to turn the dial on short-term interest rates. But the thing that's going to move interest rates and the economy is what they call tapering. So the Fed balance sheet right now is $9 trillion. It's grown by 5 trillion in the last 2 years. What tapering means is they're going to start to sell some of those bonds. That is going to let interest rates go where they should be. So interest rates at zero is crazy. Interest rates should not be zero. They've been manipulated. When the tapering starts to end, those interest rates are going to go up. That going up will almost certainly affect the stock market. And there was this thing called a taper tantrum in 2013. That was the last time that the Fed tapered. When they did that, the stock market started to crash. So even though the Fed is supposed to be, independent, they reacted to the stock market going down and reversed the tapering, started buying back bonds again. This time, if they start to taper and the stock market starts to go down, the only way for them to stop tapering is to start printing money again. And that's inflationary. So they're in a corner. So the only reason I bring that up is one of the things you can do is bet on the direction of interest rates. And if you want to hold bonds because you're used to doing that, but you want to sort of give yourself some insulation, you could buy some of these things that give you some protection. So that's a long answer, but the answer is not simple. There's a lot of things to know.
All right. Well, thank you, Ron. And now that we and our audience know a little bit about all of us and our specific areas of expertise, let's get to some questions that we can all dig into and give responses to from our specific areas. So my first question is, from your platform as a baby boomer and working with baby boomers, what is the state of the baby boomer generation as of April of 2022? What are you seeing as issues, concerns, and maybe bright spots based on your analysis? Who wants to start?
If I don't, just a quick observation. When one of our shows was about what's called the retirement crisis. This may probably not shock some of the people on the call, but 70% of those 78 million baby boomers have saved less than $300,000.
That's very true.
Less than $300,000. That doesn't mean that they've got to live under the bridge eating cat food. So much of that show is all about, so especially those who have Social Security, which is most of them. How do you live on Social Security and the little bit of savings you got? So it's a real retirement crisis. It's for real.
Absolutely, it is, and something that I have been discussing at NABBW, doing my monthly finance calls. So it's a big situation, but who else wants to address this situation? The state of the baby boomer generation. Doug? Can anybody hear me?
Yeah,
I
I
can
can
hear
hear you.
you.
Okay,
I can take that, Ann, if that's okay.
sure.
To me, what I look at just sort of as the big picture is I think that people in our age group are sort of caught between what the historical concept of us at our age group is and what the current reality is. That this historical concept is that you hit 65 and you can retire, you got a pension to retire on. It's kind of fits in with what, sort of the things that Ron was saying. And you just kind of have your golden years for the few years that you have left over 65, and the statistics back a number of decades would support that. Most people would retire and live just a few years after that. Reality is that most of us are living much beyond that, and most of us don't have that pension. So, all the assumptions that society makes and that you may have made as you go along just don't fit anymore. So, you turn to people like Ron to figure out what to do about the money situation, and you might turn to somebody like me to figure out what do you do with the next 20, 30, 40 years of your life. And I think the big problem is that most people don't really understand that difference, that people don't really realize that the life that they're looking at is not the life that they may have expected, that society expects, the life that your parents, grandparents lived, and they're not taking any action about that. And worse, they don't even realize they can. To me, that's the big danger for people our age. That's the big crisis, if you will.
Barbara?
I really feel there's a big paradigm shift societally and also in relationship. Remember when we were brought up that everybody is monogamous, you have the white picket fence and you have the house, and that's what it is. Well, it isn't like that anymore, even in relationship. Relationships have changed. So some people like women and men, some people don't live together and get married. There's a lot of different ways to do relationships right now in the paradigm shift in life. And I think it's being really conscious in the world and really looking at what we all can do as service in the world to help each other and to help others to better the world. I really feel that. And there's just a big crisis right now of the violence right now happening, and the war right now, all those things. And if you are empathic, it really affects you at a deep level. So I think there's a lot of different issues right now, but I think the paradigm shift is really it's happening right now because millennials think so different than we think. Millennials, they do not stay at a job for 40 or 50 years. They don't like a job, they quit it. They're not into really looking at homes right now or cars. Their priorities are really different. I'm learning this from working with millennials. It's been really good for me to open my mind and to learn more because I don't want to just stay stuck in this belief system. I want to expand and grow and move, with what's happening right now. So that's all for now.
Renee?
Well, thank you. And I agree. I have felt for a long time and working with, as a healthcare advocate, I work with people of all different age groups, but there really is a focus on the baby boomers in my work and then their parents. So I've had a front row seat at watching that paradigm shift right before my eyes, right? And one of the things I want to tag on a personal level on some of the things that Doug shared with us, because I'll tell you what moved me into this career. I had a very successful career in technology in Silicon Valley. In fact, I was one of the very first women there back in the 70s. And so I had my children a little bit later. I was in my mid 30s when I had my kids. Well, by the time my kids started reaching their late 20s, early 30s, they kept hearing this legend of their mom, but they had not witnessed her, right? And my daughter said to me, "I don't believe you." Because I always have these ideas of these businesses and things that change culture and some of the things we can do. And she just stopped me dead in my tracks and said, "I don't believe you because I don't see you putting feet to that." Yeah. And so she called me out, and I have to tell you, it was hard. It was a hard, those are hard words to hear, right? On one hand. On the other hand, they were motivating words because at the time I was 60 years old and, was getting ready to quote unquote retire. And it was just so stupid because I'm going to live into my 90s. Like, what the heck am I going to do for the next 30 plus years of my life, right? So my daughter really pushed me to move into this purpose that has been festering in my life for many, many years for this technology, right? And I kept telling myself all the stuff we tell ourselves. I'm too old. Who starts a company at my age? Blah, 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 right? And she was and she's a young executive. She's the CEO of a company and does very well. And she just said, like, what the heck? You're my mentor. Like, you haven't lost it. What are you talking about? What are you afraid of? Like, you have the wisdom, like, and, pardon my language, but this crap, right? So I really had to take a hard look at myself and say, yeah, she's right. She's exactly right. And so I just pulled myself up and said, no, I'm going to go at it again. And I have another corporation inside of me and I'm going to do it. Right. And that's what I'm in the middle of doing. But more than that, I think that it speaks to a lot of baby boomers. I mean, look at this panel, right? We're all doing it differently. Listen, right. My grandma retired at 50. My mom retired at 60, and I plan on being on the cover of Forbes at 70. So we're going to do it differently. We're going to change the narrative. We're going to change the paradigm, right? We're going to live better, healthy, smarter. Now, I got to say, Ron, we might not manage our money well because this generation hasn't been good at that historically, right? I always tell my kids, like, don't plan on an inheritance because mommy's spending it, right? And so now my grandkids might get a little bit different something out of it, but my kids won't. They can earn their own. But anyway, I just feel I feel so positive about what we can do as this group of baby boomers, like the things we can change, the things we will change, right? And then on the downside, I think we have to educate ourselves. We have to be aware. We have to know what, like the things Ron was sharing with us and Gramps was sharing with us, right? Like just really become aware of, how things could go if we're not sensitive and conscientious about our own actions. I spoke a little bit about that with regard to care. Unfortunately, in the care industry, we tend to make these knee-jerk emotional decisions. And I got to tell you, it's going to be some of the most expensive decisions we'll ever make. Care will cost you more than your house did if you're not careful. And there's no, great benefits to that. I will assure you of that. So that's, that's where my platform is really about the business of care, because care is a business and we have to start looking at it intelligently and behaving intelligently about it. So anyway, but I appreciate so much of the wisdom that's been shared here. Thank you.
Sure. Who else wants to participate on this question? Gramps, you got any thoughts?
Yes. The real question we have to ask ourselves is, are we better off than our parents? Are we in a better place than our parents were? I really think that our generation is very selfish. And when I say that is, think about all the friends you have and how many of them say, hey, I don't have to worry about raising my grandkids. I raise great kids. They'll take care of it. Let me go play on my own turf. So that's my biggest concern, is that we have grown into a very selfish generation. We are the more about I rather than us. And how do we get everybody else involved in realizing that, again, because we're not going to be here much longer, or we may be here 30 years, but we never know, how can we share our knowledge and really make a difference in these generations that are coming up? So I think we all need to step back and say, I think we're selfish. I think we're worried more about ourselves than anybody else. And we have to change that.
All right. Nina, I think you're kind of nodding. So you have any things that you'd like to share?
I'll respond to Gramps. I mean, I think kids are selfish. I see the flip of what you're saying. I was a stay-at-home mom. So I was so happy. I mean, I felt fortunate that I could be home with my children. I have two. And I'm not saying they're selfish, but because they're not, but they're all very self-focused, because I think our generation wanted to give our kids more than what we had. And in doing that, the result is our children were a little overindulged, spoiled, whatever, and things change so quickly. I mean, I remember getting my first microwave. The thought of melting cheese was mind-blowing to me. And my son had a Commodore that he was addicted to, already. And I put my foot down. I said, that's it. You're not getting all the other ones that come after it. This is it. But he was the only kid that only had one. Whether it was providing them their choice of college because they worked hard, or I think it's so important. It depends where you live, what your economic background was, your culture. And where I'm from in New Jersey, the kids that I knew had a lot, grew up expecting a lot. I would call them selfish, and the parents gave it all. The parents that I know, for the most part, as crazy as it sounds, exactly what you said, they're running to Florida, to the over 55s. They said, I did it already. I raised my kids. Let me out of here. I want to go play. And I'll say, well, I don't want to move away from my grandkids, but I'm in the minority that I stayed here. So it's a cultural thing. And I don't think we can change the kids. That's why I go to the Poconos for a month with my grandchildren, to show them nature and simplicity and take them out of it. Because while they're in it and in the schools and in everything, it's their reality. It's the world they live in.
All right. Anybody else? Barbara, you look like you're raising your hand.
This is going to kind of go to basics, but I think it's about modeling gratitude, kindness, and giving to others. I think we're all vessels for modeling that in the world. And I think as we walk that, and if everybody does that, that's going to give that kindness to the next and the next. Looking around at your neighbors, just basic things. I think if we start small and, go larger, get involved in more service-oriented situations. But I think just basic kindness to kindness and goodness to goodness is really important. I know that sounds really, oh yeah, but how many people really, look at their neighbors, try to help out someone on the street? Like the other day, a man fell in the street and we were driving and we stopped. I mean, just small things, or helping an elderly neighbor. I think a lot more people have kindness than not. I think that's where it is really modeling that all the time with a lot of gratitude for all what we all have. And we all have so much. I think that's really important. And that's a consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
It's a consciousness. And if we all have that kind of consciousness, then it would be a better world, in my opinion.
I just want to say one thing.
Sure.
They took out penmanship in school. Our grandchildren will never learn script. They won't be able to read script. Our children text. They don't even want the phone call. The reality is they are living in a different world, and we're not changing it for them. They're adults. Now they're going to raise their children. Yeah, absolutely. You want to be a good model and whatever. But what I'm saying is, can you imagine that we didn't learn script and we just texted to friends. We weren't developing language skills, and we weren't. Yeah, it's just so different.
I'd like to follow with what Barbara said, and I think she makes a very good point that it's important to look at life as being made up of communities, and that we all have community responsibilities. And one of the things that we can do to help facilitate that is to make certain that the people in our community understand that as people of our age group, we have a lot to share, that we're not the retired people that are going to sit on their porch and not do anything, but we have experience and we have wisdom, and we can be leaders, and we need to understand that for ourselves. And once we see ourselves as leaders and people who can help to model, like you said, Barbara, this kind of interactive behavior, then we put ourselves in that position. We can change the community around us. All these things that various people are saying, well, I think kids are selfish. I think that they're all caught up on their phones. I think they are lazy. Well, people are all different, and they're susceptible to being changed by that kind of modeling behavior. And I think it's our responsibility, rather than pulling ourselves away and running off to Florida and joining an over 50 community. And by the way, we tried that and we didn't like it because it was all full of old people, so it didn't work out for us. Plus we made the rookie mistake of giving our kids a forwarding address, so they moved with us. So it's like, but I think, not withdrawing from the community, but being an active part and taking that role that isn't as much recognized in American society as I think it is in like Eastern society, European society, where the seniors are looked upon as being sources of wisdom and sources of guidance. I think we can help to make that true here, but we have to understand that we can do that, and we have to take steps to do that.
All right. Let's move to another question that I think is related to what you're saying. Given what we've been observing, what do you think is the path forward for the baby boomer generation? Who wants to start that thought process going?
Well, I could do that. I mean, and it's really kind of what I teach is the path forward. First of all, understanding you have a path forward, and then understanding the tremendous resources there are available to make you become the best version of yourself and to accomplish the things that you want to accomplish. So the path forward needs to be a path forward and upward. And too much of society believes, and we've been taught to believe that, at our age, it's a path forward kind of downward, off to the side, be quiet, let young people come forward. And we have to understand that, it should be a path forward and upward to becoming our best version and contributing the most that we can, contributing to that community, setting a good example, doing modeling. To me, that would be the path forward for us.
I agree. Who else wants to say something? Yes.
I come back to the three things I said before: health, wealth, and purpose. And so I think it should be obvious, but it's not. The guest that we had, it wasn't obvious to him. He sort of discovered it. So I'll just throw that out there. That the health we've talked about, and you have to have an advocate or be your own advocate. If you're not healthy, you're not happy. Wealth is something that, again, on one of our shows, we talked about it's too late for some people. They haven't saved much, but you can, I think, with the right purpose, and to actually have a fairly good life. So I just say those three things are the path forward, and each of us needs to deal with where we are in life for all three of those, really.
All right, Barbara.
I also think healthy communication and healthy relationships are really in there, because if you don't have those, you're pretty isolated in life. And as we know from COVID, how many people became very depressed and isolated. And also, I think it's about expansion in life, not going within and being rigid. But I think as we grow older, I think we need to keep expanding so we can keep growing and learning new things with our minds and our bodies and with new experiences and try new things. So many people go, oh, I can't do that. I'm 70 something. Really? I mean, it's just really your attitude on, how you think of yourself and self-esteem and self-worth. All of that is what I teach. Especially it goes back to the relationship with yourself. And that's what it always comes back to. And that's what I do a lot of, is working with people with themselves, women and men. So healthy relationships are huge. And you live longer with a healthier relationship. I think that's true.
I agree with that. Renee.
Actually, I agree completely with you, Barbara. I met the love of my life at 52. And so there's really never a time out on that if you're open, right? A few years ago, I had an opportunity to be a keynote speaker at the California State Conference on Aging, and the subject matter was sex. And I'm like, okay. And so I went and in the pursuit of information and started interviewing people. And I had an opportunity to interview a group of sorority sisters from Stanford, that the youngest was 79 and the oldest was 95. And I got to tell you, I got to record that interview. I had a luncheon for them, and those gals, it was crazy what we discovered, right? And it was so uplifting and so empowering for this group of women. And listen, some of them were talking about things they had never talked out loud about before, and at one point they even said, can we turn the recorder off, right? So, which I did. I of course honored that. But really it's about getting the labels off of ourselves, stop giving our, I know, Gramps, you said that we're selfish. I don't know that we're a selfish generation. I think we're an indulgent generation. I think we've had a lot of indulgences and we indulge ourselves. That's not necessarily bad. I also think, Ron knows this better than I do, but I think we're also one of the greatest benevolent generations ever, right? We give away a lot of money. We do a lot of charity work. So indulgences aren't bad as long as there's a balance, right? And that's really what, I think the best way to live out our lives is as balanced as we possibly can, and feeding that purpose that God's given each one of us. Each of us have a calling and our own purpose, whether it's to create a great garden in our backyard, or to go out and serve our neighbors, or, maybe even run for United States Senate or government, right? There's a lot of wisdom in this group.
I would agree with that. Nina, how about you? Any thoughts?
Renee, just before we go on, I discovered my wife's problem with sex. I saw her driver's license. She got an F in sex.
That's cute. I might use that.
Okay.
I'll quote you on it though.
Well, that's funny.
No,
Thanks for that.
I agree with what Renee was saying. I think that we indulged our children a lot. So the younger generations have expectations because they were very taken care of, I think. There's no question. I know my daughter, she has 4 children and she works 50 or 60 hours a week. She's a vice president in Novartis Pharmaceutical. And every Friday, her kids bring over a challah and food to a neighbor down the block that's in her 80s. They don't ask her, they just bring it. They know, you try to show them the right things to do, the modeling. They, so it's there. But I think it really depends where you're living, what your income is, what your situation is, what part of the country you're in. I don't think there's a blanket answer for any of this, except maybe the money part, but you need to have enough.
Right. Okay. Now, let me think here. I'm looking at my time and want to make sure we get everything in here that we can. Ron, you had mentioned to me earlier that you wanted to talk about the current situation with inflation in Russia. So Can we segue quickly into that here?
Sure.
So
It's I'll do this quickly because we are running out of the time. Inflation is here to stay, and I hope it's not terrible, but the blaming it on Russia is just BS. I think we all know that. But the current inflation is being caused by supply chain stuff. That's probably transitory. People go back to work, the cargo ships get unloaded, all of that. But the money printing we've been doing, that's in the system, and it's going to stay there for a while. The theory behind this is called modern monetary theory. And it basically says, if you need to print money, if you have the printing press, you should do that if it solves your problems, but you need to stop when you cause inflation. Now, how do you stop? The way you stop is by taxing. You got to take some of that money back. So I don't know if there's ever going to be the political will to do that. Then I wrote an article called The Rest of the Story. It's patterned after Paul Harvey's radio show, if you guys remember that.
mhm.
And it's just basically saying these are things nobody else is talking about. It's even beyond Fox News. But part of that that article is about what could be a plot of Russia and China to undermine the reserve status of the U.S. dollar. And while we feel real bad about Ukraine and everything else, but if we lose that reserve status, the beginning of the end is in sight. China will become the premier economic power in the world. So that's my story.
Anybody else want to say? I think Renee, you're waving your hand.
Yeah, so Ron, in that light, we've heard the term scarcity era that there's all these resource scarcities. Do you think that's going to continue to go on? I mean, even some of the natural resources that we're starting to see depleted.
Yeah. So I don't want to promote our show too much, but one of the shows was with this fellow named Larry Siegel. And Larry is a really brilliant guy. He wrote a book, Richer, Greener, Brighter, whatever. And his outlook, you almost have to read the book, but he says almost what Gramps is saying. Things have never been better. I mean, we're pretty lucky that we were born when we were born. Our grandkids are going to see phenomenal things. But he really gets into this notion of scarcity, and he says it's not right. It's just not real.
Okay.
So I didn't do the research he did, but his book is so well documented. It's every word that he says. It's not, you need to trust him. You need to benefit from the research that he's done.
My husband will be happy to hear that response because
Well, I'm glad to make people happy. That's my
he insists that there is not scarcity as well. And I'm like, that's a big dinner time conversation that we have around here.
Yeah, it's just a fun conversation. But get Larry's book or watch our show. It was with Larry Siegel, Siegel.
Thank you.